Okay, so without fear of doing the same intro every single time, it's the Musical Minds podcast.
Part 4?
And
Is that what it is? Is it the
uh,
fourth one?
well, I uploaded the last interview with Zach as episode 4, so
Nice.
this is episode 5.
Episode 5.
Now that you're back, and
All right.
we've had like a 2-week hiatus of talking, so
Yeah.
It's us getting to know each other again.
Start from the very beginning.
And so we were going to talk about breaking down chunks and getting them more getting the music more vividly into your memory and
Chunks of music in difficult passages.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So discussing practice setup and use of repetition and how big of chunks you choose in these repetitions. So that's kind of like the overview of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So Eric, what have you been doing most recently in your practice of chunking? How do you chunk?
Well, recently I've been working on the Aeolian Harp Etude by Chopin, and I noticed that there are specific sections that feel, for lack of a better term, like blind, or like they just kind of don't feel very solid in my memory or comfortable in my hands and understanding where the changes are coming from. So I've been trying to limit my scope of practice to maybe, for a practice session of about an hour, devoting it to a single page. And I've been doing lots of slow practice, and so I'm just seeking out ways that I can better internalize these parts of the music that I don't feel nearly as comfortable with. And so I've had thoughts of, as I described in off air, doing this exercise called 2211, which isn't music related, of writing something down 22 times. And it's been coming back into my memory bank throughout the day very effectively. So I've been thinking about, well, maybe this use of high repetition and an intense short duration might be helpful.
Why is it 22 and 11? Is
Is
that a scientific reason behind that?
I actually have no idea. I kind of started it with my friend Mark, who he's the French horn player that I'm eventually going to get on the show.
Okay.
But no, I don't know the backbone of 22, but I've just been playing around with it because it's a pretty high rep activity with that, whatever you do, right?
Do you find that you think about different things every time you sort of run that passage? Because this is something similar to what I've been doing recently, which is in terms of memorization, you do a passage with the music like 5 times, and then away from the music you play it from memory once, and then you do it. You go back and you go 4, 3, 2, 1, right? And every time you go back to divide up those numbers, you read it from memory first. So like the idea behind that is that you focus on something different every time you run through that passage. So do you find, is that what you do? You find you do?
Yeah. The phrase that has gone in my mind is try and extract more from the music. Going at a slow tempo. I almost go at a tempo that I'm almost bored a little bit. That way I get to the point where I can take in more information. So I'm looking at articulation, I'm looking at notes, I'm trying to understand why the harmony is written the way it is, and where it's resolving to 1, where pedal markings are, and try and take this all in as I'm going, and also annotations to the music, whether that's dulce or something like that. So
that helps a lot with tension release too. I've found that kind of slow slow practice like that,
Mm-hmm.
where you're completely in control of all of that. I realized when I used to do that a few years ago, I would still have a lot of.
Just give me 1 second.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
sorry. Yeah. What do you need? No, no thanks. Sorry.
Sorry.
We can edit this whole thing out.
All right.
So if you can resume what you're talking about.
What was I talking about? Oh yeah. So in slow practice like that, where you're almost bored, I realized when I was doing slow stuff, I would always be like as tight as possible because I was trying to be as musical as possible all the time, and not giving myself room in my own practice to step back mentally and emotionally. So you just observe, like you said, sort of parse really fine details out of the music when you're doing something like that. That's something I had to learn a little bit late, I think, and that helped a lot with tension release, and therefore like those tricky passages that we chunk, they become way easier, and you understand them, and they're musical because you're not trying to hit it every time.
Yeah, definitely. This just gets me excited thinking about. There's a couple passages in that etude that I like want to hammer home on. How big of chunks do you choose in general?
It depends on what I'm doing. So I have a good example actually. So I played Holst this weekend, the Planets Orchestral Suite.
Oh, okay.
And only it was a gig, so I didn't have a lot of time to prepare it, and there are a couple really fast passages. So it's like you'd do a couple practice sessions and then hope for the best, and fake what you can't do. But I was doing a lot of the first step is like obviously you find what frame works with all of the notes. So whatever scale or mode that your passage is in, like you figure out what that is, you make sure you can play in tune slowly. And then the second part of that is, I didn't have time to do this in depth, but you do something like you play 4 notes really fast, say, or like you stop on the downbeat, and then the next 3 notes you play really fast, and then you stop on the next downbeat, play the next 3 notes really fast. And the idea is like eventually you can add 2 measures together. So you play the downbeat, and then you play to the 4th beat of the second measure, and then you do it again with the next one. And hopefully, if you have a lot of time, the downbeat you can change so that you'll hit the second beat, and then you'll do it really fast and hit the second beat of the next measure. So that way you're learning like all of the different kinds of figurations, fast and slow, that passage will offer. And eventually you pretty much just do that with the metronome and up the tempo as much as you can with all of those variations, even not just even like a straight tempo. You do like the dotted rhythms at that particular tempo, and then you could jam them together. So that's kind of like for small passage work like that, like really fast stuff. And then there's stuff like for memory, which is what I'm doing with like the 4th Bach suite. Is a recommendation of my teacher. It's like a 2-page thing for single line solo viola. So divide it into 4, and you take the first half of the first page, say, and that's what you do the 5-4-3-2-1 thing that I talked about earlier. You just like keep it pretty small. You can do that at whatever tempo. Maybe ideally the metronome you should be able to recall it right at different tempos and at different figurations, which is not always the easiest thing. But you're assuming that you can do all of that. That means your memory is pretty solid. I think you're not relying just on muscle memory at that point. Yeah.
Are you choosing the same tempo on those 5 repetitions before memorization, or are you trying to experiment with different expression styles and
Yeah, I should. I find one of the things I'm working on is like consistency a lot in interpretation, especially with Bach, because I'm really bad with doing it differently every time. I can't really decide on like what I like. So in those practice sessions, I think it's it'd be worth experimenting a little more. Although I will say I think it's more helpful to flip it everything so that you do 5 repetitions with memory and then 1 from the page, and then 4 repetitions from memory and 1 from the page. And obviously, like each repetition, you think of something different, so that you're working your outside brain rather than just what your notes will be.
Yeah. Obviously, that would probably be at the later stages of learning a piece, because you're relying much more on your memory than the sheet music.
Definitely true. But that's why you can change the chunks that you're working from, you know? Like when I started doing that, I think you did a line, maybe 2 lines. And it can be just a measure even. And so like that's how you build up from memory if you're just starting to do it. Yeah. Does that resonate with you? Do you do similar things, or what's your strategy?
I don't think that I'm nearly as academic or rigorous about the process of converting the sheet music and note reading into memory, which I probably should, if I'm being quite honest. But I generally just practice with the sheet music a lot, and then I kind of
I didn't see you. I really didn't have my glasses on, so I was squinting because I didn't know what was you. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
We can cut this. We can cut this out. It's fine.
Okay, bye.
Okay, see you guys.
I don't know. Some people think
Okay.
All right.
Good. Sorry about that.
So, what I was talking about was I know that I'm not good, or I'm not as proficient with the music when I'm not as proficient with the music when I'm out performing and I play these chunks that have blind spots in them, or kind of
you mean it's more comfortable from memory, or the other way around?
It depends. It's like I kind of use the performance as a way of detecting if it's really there or not. But I do see the value of what you're talking about, of practicing the music without sheet music, and like doing small chunks from memory. That way you can identify the stylistic interpretation that you want to have for this specific section. But
right.
Yeah, that's probably something that I'll implement. I haven't done that in my process. Man, there's going to be a lot of post-production for this.
I know, right? It's a small school. It's great. Yeah. Cool. Sorry. So you'll incorporate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right on, man.
Okay.
Good talk. So what else? What else are we doing? I mean, that's hardly it. That's just scratching the surface for techniques. Well, you were talking about how you maintain flow in a practice session, right?
Yeah, that's something that has been on my mind, because I was hanging out with Mark, that same guy, about a week ago, and he was noticing that I was consistently breaking flow as I'm playing this piece that has like really, really big chords, and I'm like stopping at every chord because I'm trying to figure out all the notes that are in there, and I'm not 100% familiar with the piece. And he was like, saying to me, he's like, just maintain flow, and it's okay if you hit wrong notes, but just keep going and be aware of the wrong notes that you're hitting, and then go. So the way I am thinking about it is like, at least commit to like maybe 3 measures or 4 measures, and or base maybe like 10 to 20 seconds of material, I guess. Commit to doing that much in perfect flow and noticing where you make mistakes, and try and refine those mistakes as you go, but don't stop on the mistake right when it happens.
I've heard this similar thing, because then you're practicing breaking flow. So when you're performing, like, that's not going to be as secure. I think we referenced that in a couple podcasts ago with sort of my summer of practicing in the studio, and like all I would do is like have really slow practice and fix everything. And it ended up really affecting like confidence in performing, because it was all learned as stopping, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really something that I've kind of had to I need to train out of myself, because past teachers have sort of ingrained that in me to like, they point out every single missed note that I have as it's happening, and make me go back. And so I want to kind of break that habit. And I also try and do that with my students. I will allow them to keep going, and then we'll reference it later. But I don't want to train myself nor my students to get in this habit of always stopping right when you miss a note, or something doesn't feel quite right, because that break of flow, just like we've had these distractions in our podcast today, and it completely kind of throws us off,
Right.
and then we like lose what we're thinking about and what we're talking about. And so
and then you got to make jump cuts. You find yourself making jump cuts.
Yeah, so we have to, and then it always takes a certain amount of time to get back into flow. There's this thing that Tim Ferriss talks about where he'll block out 3 hours of time for creative projects like writing or something. And even if he could answer a text message that might take 30 seconds in the middle of it, say he's an hour into his creative process and then he has to answer a text message, it'll take him maybe 20 to 30 minutes to get back into flow after changing his objective or his task. And so so if you're constantly losing this flow, you potentially might never, or will have a really hard time just kind of finding that enjoyable state of playing. And so that's something that I want to work on more, and that I've been thinking about this week.
The other thing that reminds me of is the way that you structure your practice before you start. Because I've like kind of experimented with this off and on during the years. Like right now, I'm actually not keeping a practice journal, and I'm like, any spare moment that I have to practice, I'll just go. And I have so much music to learn that I don't feel like I have time to do creative things, like creative methods of practice, which is probably not true, but I just feel like stressed out. So I have five symphonies to learn, so I'll just like go do that. And it's just like, okay, it's just work at that point. You know what I mean? In the way that you like chunk those passages and like make sure you have all the hard parts memorized, you know how everything goes. But I used to sort of block out an hour, and I would say like, okay, 20 minutes of like C major arpeggios. Then maybe like, I don't know, then I'll do like open strings for 10 minutes to warm up or something like that. I'll write it in, and then I'll write like, or I used to do this anyway. I used to write like how you think you can improve each of those things. Like maybe a thing that went well and a thing that didn't go well. So like for next time, let's like practice changes at the frog, because those were like really, the frog is the end of the bow. Those were really like rough. So let me do that again next time I do that tomorrow. So like you have a method book really, so you can see where you left off the day before. And that's something I try to make my students do when I'm teaching, is because that creates like ownership of your practice session. So you're not just practicing for an idea, you're like actively engaging with the physical activities of learning whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it's arpeggios or just like how to hold the instrument. But that's the ideal.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to understand if you find the value in the practice journal, and the pre-preparation, like if you were spending a couple minutes beforehand just documenting what I'm gonna do today or what I'm gonna accomplish.
Well, in terms of, I brought it up, actually, I didn't make my point. I forgot. Just in terms of flow of a practice session, so that you don't have to, when you're done working on a section, you don't have to start thinking about like what else you want to work on in the middle of your session. Like you just go right to the things that you've already blocked out, and you already have the time, set the timer, like you don't have to think about it. I think, I really don't know. I think I've been sort of meaning to get back into it recently, because I think that, time is better spent that way. But it also requires a regular schedule, and I, don't have that either in school, because everything's different every day. So I just find time where I can, and then freak out about my lesson tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I personally, I'm just not nearly as disciplined, or I don't know, like I'm a little bit more free flowing about the whole thing. And I don't think I've ever maintained a practice journal, which is something that I feel like I should do more. But this is something that I've been using Mark as an accountability buddy. Is and this is his technique, not mine, where he'll like kind of identify some things that he wants to work on. So he'll like write it down, and then we will send each other an audio message of us singing our goals or like practice goals so it's like, today I'm gonna work on the C major scale. And I don't know if that's super loud, I'm sorry.
No, not at all. That's amazing.
And
I officially have never heard anybody do that before. That's the most creative thing.
It's really funny, because when you do that and you turn everything into a song, it becomes much less serious. And so like I've been experimenting with that just to like kind of break the tone of serious and have it be a little bit more playful and exploratory in its
That's
nature.
really interesting.
So
has it worked thus far?
Yeah, there's been I've actually had a couple of pretty good freestyles talking about my I was working on a Grand Valse Briante, a nice waltz, and by Chopin, and I came up with some pretty good rhymes, and it kind of made me set me in a good mood to just want to get better, rather than practicing from a place of I'm not good enough. I need to be better.
Yeah, I mean that's the name of the game right there. That's what I struggle with a lot.
Yeah,
like you have to skew it in a positive way, otherwise it's not really healthy after a while.
Yeah. So I've just been playing around with the singing, and it's kind of silly, the little rhymes that you can come up with, and also just activating your voice, singing in like these vocal qualities also I think can really help with your musicality in certain ways.
Improvise like that. Yeah, I really like that idea.
Because I mean, all the composers, or at least I know Chopin, he was heavily inspired by just vocal phrasing and one of my teachers, Kyle, he talks about like anytime that he tries to write something just at like the computer or something without voice in mind, it comes off as like contrived and not just, I guess, not as natural or organic. So
I've heard that before from composers. I've experienced that myself too. Like the idea of like just writing music in the car when you're on your laptop. That's like a very strange thing. You don't have the piano to help you out at all. I'd say
so
another part of flow that I've been dealing with a lot, especially in the last 2 months, is especially for string players, is setup stuff. So like how comfortable your shoulder rest and chin rest are, and how like easy it feels to physically just hold the instrument. Because I've spent many an hour sort of tweaking my shoulder rest adjustment, when I'm in the middle of my practice session. And I think that's actually, now that I am being honest with myself, is one of the reasons I haven't been doing a practice journal, because if you block out a certain amount of time for arpeggios and half of that time you're spending adjusting your shoulder rest because you're uncomfortable, it doesn't really work, so the time becomes sort of nebulous when that happens. I think that's a really important part of keeping your focus.
So just kind of like addressing what is coming up as it is. So like you notice you're getting uncomfortable and therefore fine tunings. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So it doesn't become about sort of improving your tactile function of the fingers. It's like, let me make sure that I'm not going to hurt myself real quick by adjusting my shoulder rest. Because I've dealt with injury stuff in the past. It's like first on my mind whenever I feel something like that, I'm like, oh, like pump the brakes. Need to fix this right now. Because if you don't, then you just create more tension and it compounds. So
yeah. That reminds me of The Obstacle is the Way. It's a book that I'm reading right now. It's like modern day stoicism, but basically it talks about these interjections or things that grab your attention that are probably uncomfortable, and they are the direction that you should push your full attention towards. And there was a really beautiful analogy or kind of lesson that Mark gave me. We were walking in a park and he was talking about like I would just push him in a certain direction and then he would just kind of use the momentum of my pushing or in a certain direction to go in that direction. And it was just a very graceful way of handling these obstacles. And so I could imagine as you're doing like these arpeggiated sections, if you're constantly resisting like this body tension and not addressing it, it'll just be you constantly switching in your mind between this is uncomfortable and no, get back to work.
Right. And that's sort of another reason for going away from deliberate timed practice in the same way, because if you're constantly switching between those two frames of mind, as you mentioned, like it becomes impossible and irritating. And when you're saying like, how much did I practice today? Does stretching count in the hour count? Does taking a break count? Does like looking at your music and analyzing stuff count? So I would think about that a lot, because like there's a quota that you're expected to meet, or that you might like set for yourself. You're like, I'll practice 4 hours every day, but what is that? What is that really mean? 4 hours of actually touching your instrument or thinking about it, or because mental practice, we talked about that in a couple podcasts ago. That might be just as helpful sometimes as actually touching your instrument. So
yeah,
it's hard to know.
I think what's most important to me is just like making sure I get in a certain number of reps of something that I want to like progress on, just because I want to make sure that my brain changes from day to day as far as like taking on a new piece. And you can do that mentally, but I want to make sure that I'm doing the reps, if that makes sense, at least a couple times, or spend a couple minutes on it, just so that I know that there's progress. Because even if I analyze the music, doesn't necessarily mean that I'll have I mean, in ways you can have a better grasp of what's going on and like know where you're going to resolve to or where you're going to go next. But I really want to ingrain it in my body, and brain. So the physical practice, or imagining the physical practice, is I guess what I really want to make sure I at least get some time on.
Definitely. Yeah. Muscle memory is important.
Yeah. So that's how I would treat that, I guess.
I'm about out for that, I think, right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to wrap up?
Let's see. Yeah. I think that's pretty packed half an hour, I think.
Yeah, we'll go through and put everything together. Are any of your recordings of like your performances uploaded or no?
Not yet. I haven't had a first recital is, what's the date today? The 5th. It's in 10 days.
Okay, solo recital?
Well, I'm premiering a piece by a composer that goes here.
Okay.
We have a viola recital in the spring, so everyone chooses a piece that's been commissioned by the viola studio, and they perform it. So that'll be up soon, and I think we're doing a couple master classes. I'm doing the Brahms the Brahms clarinet quintet right now, so that'll be up as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I just wanted to make sure that you got as much promotion as I am, because I'm just promoting my website and YouTube channel. This is actually going to be on our Musical Minds YouTube channel.
Okay.
Which I set up today.
Awesome.
So I'm going to have this be more of the educational sector, whereas my YouTube will be more of recordings and
artistic stuff. It sounds like.
Yeah, so kind of compartmentalize those two. So
sounds like a great idea. You hustle, it sounds like. Yeah, I could learn a thing or two.
Yeah, in ways. maybe I pay attention to the wrong stuff sometimes. Oh well.
All right.
Okay. Well, we will wrap up for today, episode 5. Enjoy. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and a review
for everyone.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.